With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Lamed Hey. We are starting to learn about the chiyuv of eating matzah on the first night of Pesach. What species of grains are allowed to be used for making kosher matzahs? We will really have in the Mishnah 3 sections. The first section is going to speak about the types of grains that are good to be used. The Mishnah then is going to speak about various items that have problems with them, various breads that have problems with them, and thus may not be used. We're going to have on Daf Lamed Hey Amid Beis, I'm jumping ahead. We're going to have a whole Amid that we had in Brachas and in Shabbos and in Eruvin, and we're going to have here again in Pesachim regarding tithing, regarding if someone anticipated and gave to the Levi the Ma'aser Rishon before he separated the Truma Gedola, whether the Levi has to also separate, as we'll explain, that little addition that he got extra because of the owners first giving the Ma'aser Rishon before the Truma Gedola. In other words, if you had matzahs made out of such grains, and we're going to have ultimately in the Mishnah speaking about someone who prepared breads for 2 karbanos, either for Toida or for the Kikei Nazir, the person changed one's mind and decided to use that for Achilas Matzah, whether that is valid or not. Now we're going to have the Gevaldike rule on Daf Lamed Hey, and that is that Dvarim Haboyim L'Deichimutz, that only materials, only raw materials, only grains that could become chamazdik if they are left to rise, only they may be used for the mitzvah of eating matzah. Adam yoytze b'hem yedei chavase b'matzah. But other items that can never become halachically chamazdik, they may not be used for the mitzvah of eating matzah. We're going to learn about mitzvah haba ba'aveda. We're going to learn about a mitzvah that even comes to a rabbinic aveda. And God willing, if we'll have time on Daf Lamed Hey based on the bottom, we're going to have a Gevaldike application of the rule of Ein Isur Chal Al Isur. Let us start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah around 8 lines from the top of the Amud on Daf Lamed Hey. Says the Mishnah, Elu Devarim Sha'adam Yoitze Bahem Yedei Choyvasu Pesach. The following species of grain are okay, are valid for someone to fulfill their obligation of eating matzah on the night of the Seder, on the first night of Pesach, or Chutzlot, it's the first 2 nights of Pesach. And here are the 5 types of grains: Bechitim with wheat, Besoidim with barley. These are the 2 main species. Each one of them has subspecies, have a subcategory, and that is that Kusman spelt is a subcategory of wheat. And then you have Shifa and rye and Shabbai Lashual oats that are subcategories of barley. These are the only 5 species. Weiter says the Mishnah, the Yoitzin b'demai, demai is grain that someone purchased from Amaretz. Ubizman ba'yisheni, they made a takana, that even though the majority of Amaratzim separated all the Trumas from Maasros, but there was a substantial minority that did not separate all of them. And rabbinically, when you buy produce from a Amaretz, before you consume it, you have to separate those tithings that you should suspect that they did not. Eating the mai before you separate all of the Trumas from Maasros is an Isur Midrabanan. Nevertheless, says the Mishnah, that if you bought grains from an Amaretz, they are demai, you made out of it matzah, without separating what you normally need to, you will be yoitza. And the question will be in the Gemara, why? Next in, that if there's a Levi who received Ma'aser Rishon and he separated Ma'aser min ha-Ma'aser, now what remains is proper Ma'aser Rishon that has no kedusha as we paskin. It can be consumed not only by the Levi, it's property of the Levi, but it can be gifted or sold to a Yisrael. And indeed, a Yid is allowed to make matzah and to be yoytze the mitzvah. We'll see in the Gemara, like Pshita, what's the Chiddush? The next din is Ube Ma'aser Sheni, which has to be consumed only on Yerushalayim. But if it is redeemed, then the Kedusha goes onto the money and the produce can be consumed anywhere. Likewise, Hegdish, whenever one is allowed to redeem Hegdish, the Hegdish, the Kedusha goes onto the money, but the produce becomes Banafite Chulin, and indeed, both of these grains are okay to be used for matzah. Here also the Gemara is going to have to explain Pshita. Next in, Kohanim are allowed to eat matzah that was gifted to them as challah or as truma, Again, Pshita, we'll see in the Gemara the Chiddush. Avaloi b'tevel, but if matzah is made out of tevel or made out of ma'aser shaloi nitra trumasoi, which is like tevel, nor can you make matzah from ma'aser sheni if you are eating it outside Yerushalayim, or if it's hegdish, that was not redeemed. And again, on all of these, Pshita, it's not good. Final part of the Mishnah, chalois hatoida. You know, the chalos of toida, there were 40 loaves of bread that accompanied every carbon toida. Right, 30 of them were taka matzah, not chametz dik, they were not leavened. If a person made chalos toida, or when it comes to the rekike nazir, there you have 20 loaves of rekikim that are made, that accompany the korbanos of a nazir. If a person made them for himself, and then the person decided, I'm not going to use them for my carbon, I'm going to use them to fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. Here says the Mishnah, Ein yoytze bahen. You're not yoytze. Even though Rashi says that you were not leikara aleim shame. In other words, they are not imbued, they're not hegdish yet. But since you initially made them for the karbanos, if you made them for yourself, you can't use it. However, asam limkar bashuk, but if you made them to sell it to other people that might have to bring a carbon trader, or nizirim that need their kikin, again, they were not madish it, but you never made it for you. Your intent was to sell it. Here you are allowed to change your mind and to use it for your mitzvah of eating matzah. And here again, we'll see in the Gemara what's the problem with it and why for yourself no, and for others yes. So let us begin with the Gemara focusing on the 5 types of grains that are valid for the mitzvah of eating matzah. So first of all, Tana, we learned in a brisa that kusmin spelt min chitim. It's a subcategory of wheat. Shabayla shul and shifain, oats and rye, they are subcategories of barley. Lamainaf kamina, so Rashi writes gavaldik, the first Rashi in the Gemara, because there's a rule that the ein tarmen mimin al she'ein minay. Right? You don't have to tithe from things that grew together. They could have grown in one field or in another field, as long as min hamukaf, as long as you bring them together, you can separate trumas and maises, as long as they are from the same type. Min al she'ein mina is not valid. So we want to teach you what's considered min and what's not its min. So there are generally only 2 categories of grain, chitim and so'irim. Each one has subcategory or subcategories. That's why the Gemara the Brais is telling you which is part of which its own group, and therefore you could be toidim, let's say from spelt on wheat or from wheat on spelt. What is kusamin? So we know in English it's called spelt. So the Gemara gives us the Aramish word that in Aramaic it's called gulba. What does she find in English? It's rye. That's dishra. What are oats? So they are called shevile ta'ala, the ears of a fox, because the ears of the grain have the same shape of a tail of a fox. Okay. Nekuda. Says the Gemara, write the second white line. Hani in. The Mishnah enumerates 5 types of grains to tell you that only from these 5 you can make the mitzvah and fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. However, oides v'doichen, here we go. Now, yes, I know that in Brachas Daf Lamed Zayin, we have the unique Shitas Rashi that teaches oides is millet. And doichen is some sort of panic grass. But we're going to teach oides, rice, doichen, millet. And there, if you made flour out of oides and doichen and then made them into breads, you are not fulfilling your obligation. Milo anamili. And Amar Abshuma ben Lakish, the Chen Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, the Chen Tana Devei Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, that since Amar Kra, since the pasuk says in the A, Lo Soichal Olav Chametz, juxtaposed to in the same pasuk, can't eat chametz, 7 days eat matzah. Shivas Yamam Teichel Olav Matzos. The pasuk continues Lechem Oini. We'll get to the Lechem Oini in a moment. So since we put together the prohibition of not eating chametz and the obligation of eating matzahs, so we have over here the limud, dvarim haboim lidei chimutz, that which could become chametzdik if you let it rise. Dafke that adam yoytze bohen yedei chavasa b'matzah. And what does that exclude? Yotzu elu, that excludes flour made out of oides, rice, flour that's made out of doichen millet, sin she'ein boim lidei chimutz, even if you leave these materials be. And they have a certain amount of rising. But halachically, we don't call that chametz, but we say that they came to sirchoin, they spoiled, they don't become chametz. So therefore, you may not fulfill your obligation of eating matzah with oides and with doichen, gevaldik limud. And you should know that our Mishnah is not like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. With this Tanach, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri argues with this limud. The Amar, he holds that oides is a mindagen, and v'chayavin al chimutzei kares. In other words, it's good for matzah, because if you let it rise, he doesn't call that sirchain, he calls that bonafide chametz, and your taka bonafide chametz midoiraisa, and if you eat that, you're going to be chayiv kares, God forbid, if you ate it to mezid. The Tanya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, oiser, ba'oires v'doichen, that means any dish, we learn, that is made with rice or with millet on Pesach. And normally when you make a dish, you're not careful that it shouldn't rise. So he says that mipnei shekarov lahachmetz. These are his words. Now the words karov lahachmetz can really have two opposite meanings. It can mean that it almost becomes chametzik. It might be yasser doiraisa, but at least not kares. Or karov lahachmetz, which is what he means. It means that it becomes chametzik even quicker than the 5 grains. And when it becomes chametzik, it's bonafide chametz. So indeed, when they learned this braisa of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri in the yeshiva, they wondered, they asked, what does he mean? Shekarov lahachmetz means the kadam umachmetz, right? The kadam umachmetz, oidilma karov lahachmetz, have it only gets near, either that it becomes chametz quick, or it almost becomes chametz, but it never becomes bonafide chametz. Now, a concept of something becoming almost chametzik and not full-fledged chametz, Rashi holds, that means not that it's not also midoiraisa. That would mean that it's taka also midoiraisa. Rashi 3 lines under the Gemara, 4 lines under the Gemara. Elama, you would not be chayiv kares if you eat it b'mezid. And therefore, if a person eats it b'shoigig, they would not have to bring a carbon, but it would be also doiraisa. So for sure, he holds, let's go with the types of rice and millet. Oidus and doichen is rice and millet. And if you make a dish with it, then therefore it rises, you don't make it the way you make matzah. You don't rush it through. Then you're going to be chayiv. So already, and therefore, and if you're chayiv kares, if that's what he means, which is what he means, as we see, then according to him, you can make rice matzahs and be yoitza. Because everyone agrees to the link that which becomes chametzik will be good for the mitzvah of matzah. How ironic. That which can never becomes chametzik is never valid for you to fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah. But what does Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri mean? So Tashema, we have a braisa that elaborates further that the Omar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri oides min daganu, and here that's the key, v'chayavin al chimutza ikares, and therefore v'adam yotzim v'yedei chavasim Pesach. In other words, and therefore our Mishnah is Beloike Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. Our Mishnah enumerated the 5 grains, dafka the 5 and nothing else. And says the Gemara, V'chein Rabbi Yochanan Omer, that keramis, he didn't only add 1 to the 5 grains, but we'll see in a moment what keramis is also a grain upon which you're chayiv in challah. Who's talking about challah? Look inside Rashi 3 lines under the Gemara. So keramis, the Gemara will explain. Chayav is bechallah zok Rashi the mindagen have. Keramis is also a type of grain, and va'afal gav the chalas lechem ksiv ba the gomar lechem oinim menaches. In other words, bread, only bread. The Gemara says in menaches that's made from a flour that could produce matzah. Only that bread is chayiv in challah. Very good. That's the link. That's the Gemara menaches. So keramis is chayiv b'challah, which means it's also valid for you to make matzah out of keramis, like Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri holds by oiris and by doichen. And all because it can become chametzik, not stam chametzik, but it becomes chametzik, oiris and doichen quickly, shekarev lahachmetz, whether keramis is karev lahachmetz or not, the Gemara is not saying, but obviously it could become bonafide chametz. Eating it on Pesach is chayiv kares, so that also is chayiv b'challah, and also you can make matzah out of keramis. My keramis, Amar Abaya shitzonisa, lasach geholfen. My shitzonisa, Amar Rav Papa shitzonitza is that which the mishkachta, that which is found beinei kalonisa, It's found Beinei Kalonisa. So Rashi helps us out abyssal. What does Rashi say? It's some sort of ketzach. It's some sort of black round kernels. It's called in English fennel flour. Is according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, a flour which can become chametzik, which means yechayiv and challah, which you can make out of it matzah if you make sure that it does not rise. And if you did not take those precautions, then according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, only a person, God forbid, b'mezid will be chayiv kares. The nekuda is l'kula alma is that we have the pasuk in the A that juxtaposes loisaychal of chametz, shivas yamim, pleichal of matzos, lechamayni, and that's the nekuda that only that which can become chametzdik is good to be yoytze the mitzvah of matzah. The question is, could oiris and doichen become chametzdik? So according to Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, yes, and that's why he will be machalik on our Mishnah. Says the Gemara. Another din. Amar Rabba bar chana amar Reish Lakish. Isa shenei loisha. If you have dough, it means you took flour from the 5 grains, but you kneaded it only with wine or with oil or with dvash. No difference whether the dvash is dvash tamarim or whether it's the bees honey. So says Rabba in the name of Reish Lakish, ein chayavin al chimutza kares. All right. Now the question will be why? Why are you not chayiv kares if that rose, and it looks like chametz? So Yosef, Rav Papa, Rav Huna ben Rabbi Yeshua, while they were sitting in front of their teacher Ravidi bar Oven, and this was a moment that their teacher Ravidi bar Oven, at that moment the Kamenamim was dozing off. So the 2 Talmidim are talking amongst each other in front of their Rebbe. Amar lei Rav Huna ben Rabbi Yeshua, Rav Papa, my Talmud Reish Lakish. Why are you not? And basically, he's saying that any dough that's made from juices, right? And juices doesn't only mean made paytas as in paytas, right? Devash tamarim, devash from a honey is also included in this fruit juices made paytas that it will not become biblical chametz. So Amar lei. So that Papa responded. This is all in front of the teacher. The teacher is dozing off because the Amar Kra, he takes the same pasuk and he goes in the opposite direction. It says, Lo yisaychal olav chametz, eat matzah, devarim, sha'adam yoyis v'hem yedei chavasa b'matzah. Go in the other direction. He's going in the opposite direction. When the pasuk says, for 7 days you should eat matzah, it says, lechem oini. Now there's a machlokes what lechem oini means. Either lechem oini means lechem, upon which oinim devarim harbe. In other words, it's a mitzvah. The mitzvah of magid is when you have a prop, which is the matzah. Actually, our minig is throughout Magid is that we uncover some of the matzah, right? Lechem she'oin in all of Dvarim Harbe. But then you have the pasha to taich of lechem oini. How people, the bread of the poor. Poor people have flour and water, and when you make bread with the shemen or yayin or dvash or other things, that's already called lechem of an osher. So you go since. So he said like this: Dvarim she'adam yoytzim ne'rozim b'matzah. Only then. If it became chametz, dikay chayiv kares, and the dough made with juices of fruit, that the hoyel the ein adam yoytze b'yidei chavasai farvas, because the have yilei matzah ashira, rich man's matzah, yavaldik. Therefore, ein chayav al chimutze kares, that you will not be chayiv kares yavaldik. In other words, it's take chametz. Staka chametz. Narvos then you're not going to be chayiv. You're not going to be chayiv kares. Amazing. Says the Gemara. Yishua Papa. This is again all in front of the teacher. That's dozing. It says in a braisa that if a person dissolves any grain product, you dissolve it. You put it in water. Ki machuhu, and then vigima. Then you swallow it. But you didn't chew it properly. You dissolved it and you swallowed it. So says the Braisa that im chametzu anush kares. Swallowing, is tantamount to eating. Okay. However, if you take matzah and then you put it into water, we're not talking about gebrachs, we're speaking about meikar adin, and it dissolves, and now you swallow it. Says the Braisa there, ein adam yoysi yedei chavasa b'Pesach. And that is really connected to a sugi we learned not that long ago, that certain things have to be consumed derech achilasai, and dissolving a food that's meant to be chewed and then swallowing the guk, that Rashi says, the last Rashi in the Amid, that the lav derech achila ka'achalei. Okay, so what's the problem over here? The Ha'achi asks Rafuna, the ein adam yoytzi lechavase b'matzah, we just said in the Braisa, if it's dissolved, and nevertheless, if you take that which is chametzik and you dissolve it, you are chayiv al chimutzei koris. So this juxtaposition of the pasuk and the a going in the opposite direction that we began with today, that's something that the Braisa does not subscribe to. It's wrong. And indeed, when he asked him that question, at that moment, Ipar Bohu Rabbi Idi Baravin, the teacher, woke up, and Amalahu, and in his dozing off, he heard the conversation, and he says, Dardiki Kindalach, I'll tell you the reason for Reish Lakish. Because since you made dough, since you took flour and you mixed it with mei peiros, the Havalu mei peiros, and Aflam and Hamid Beis, this is important. And not because of a juxtaposition, not because you can't be yoytze matzah. He's not saying that you're yoytze the mitzvah of matzah. There's nothing to do with that. Because of a cloud that will make peiros ein machmitzin, that anything that's made with mei peiros will not become chametz. Now to what point do you say that mei peiros ein machmitzin? I know we're learning quickly, but here you have a very important tosfos. There's really a big machlokes rishonim, at least in the beginning. Rabbeinu Tam, that tosfos quotes amongst other shitas hold that if you have water and mei peiros, that's much worse. Then it becomes chametzik even quicker. That's called the cut of lahachmitz that we had in Amud Aleph. It quickly becomes chametzik. If there is no water, if there's no water at all, what halacha considers water, I know that fruit juices are moist, but mei peiros, Rabbeinu Tam holds the ein machmitzin kol iker. So one application of that, for example, will be that when we are machmid, like the Alter Rebbe writes, not to have gebracht during the first 7 days of Pesach. I'm not advocating for people to do it, but if you were to have something that has no water in it at all, it's pure mei peiros, then there's no problem even for those.
Like avocado.
Huh?
Like an avocado.
This is if you hold like the Rabbeinu Tam, which we paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam, that it's not machmid, it's kol iker. Excuse me, this is very important Gemara. I know we're going quick because we have the pasuk in the A, and we refuted the second limud. We still stand with the first limud that only that which can become chametz, only that is something which you can use for the mitzvah of matzah. That we stand with, and being that we do not paskin like Rabbi Yochanan ben Uri, therefore the only grains that we may use for the mitzvah of matzah, the very practical Mishnah, is from the 5 grains. Now, there is a very big machlokes amongst the poskim whether the Seder in the Mishnah is meduyak as to what is better than the other. We're going to learn later in the Mishnah about Matter. There, for sure, with the one that Rabbeinu HaKadosh mentioned first in Matter is the one that's ideally to be used. Here also, the Mishnah mentions chitin and then so'irin. Now, the question is, kusmin, the Gemara said, is a subcategory, spelt is a subcategory of wheat. But you should know that in halacha, wheat is more chashiv than barley. Just for example, in the whole kachim, in the Beis HaMikdash, all of the menachos were made out of wheat. I know there are 2 exceptions. Those are exceptions, right? The soit is made out of barley, and then you have the karbonomer, which is like made out of barley. Other than that, a mincha in the Beis HaMikdash, the only grain is wheat. Wheat is Michael Adam in Hasidus. Soidim is Michael Behema. And spelled, we learned in our Gemara today, is a subcategory of wheat. So this is the question. If a person, for whatever reason, is not going to have wheat, what is the second best? Is it barley or is it spelt? If we're going to say that the Seder of the Mishnah is meduik in the ideal, then chitim and then so'irim. These are the avos of the wheats. Everything else is only like the toldos, the subcategories. Or not. Or maybe the Torah mentions chitim and so'irim, when the Torah speaks about the 7 Shivas Haminim, so maybe that's why Rabbeinu HaKadosh puts it over here. But maybe spelt is better than barley. I know spelt for sure is more expensive than barley, but maybe halachically it's also better if you're not going to have wheat, and so much more from the first part of the Mishnah. Now, what we're going to continue learning right now, you should know that not all of it, but some of this Amid, I don't know if you have this in any other place. We had in Brachas, Mamish, and in Shabbos, and in Eruvin, and now we're having it in Pesachim. So this is a great chazara. We're going through all of the other items that the Mishnah mentioned. Either it's going to be pshita that you can't use it, or pshita that you could use it. So let's begin. Yotzei b'damai. I'm sorry, here the kashas. Then you can make matzah out of the mai and a meiser. So let's focus on the demai. Demai, how can you make matzah out of the mai? We keep rabbinic laws. From the time that they made that gezerah, if you buy produce from an Amaretz, right, you have to tithe whatever their choyesh that the Jew was, the Amaretz did not separate. And before you do that, you may not eat it. Now, eating matzah from a food that the Chachamim say you can't eat, let's call that a mitzvah haba b'aveda. How can you be yotzei the mitzvah? So answers the Gemara, this is very important, that the Isur D'Rabbanan of the Mai is unlike other Isur D'Rabbanan. The Chachamim themselves gave an exception, and that is that if someone is very poor, they can eat the Mai. So since Kivin answers the Gemara, this person who's eating now matzah with the Mai, had this person renounced all of his ownership on his stuff, he right now can become halachically an ani. Will become an ani, and there is no isur demai on the ani. The oichel demai, as we'll see in a moment, takanat shitas beishami, but yes, shitas beisilel, and beishami b'makim beisilel is not even a mishnah. So hashtanami, even if he's not mafkir lenichsei, even if he's not an ani, still chazile, he potentially can eat demai. Now the Tanach, as we learned in the Mishnah in the Mai, that machilam eswanim demai. You have an ani coming over to your house, you can give them the mai. Similarly, for the same underlying reason, the es achsenoi are soldiers that we needed to house when they went through our cities. We're speaking about Jewish soldiers, that they have a halachic status of an ani. They're like yeshiva bachrim. They have nothing with them, and whatever they had with them belongs to the government. You can feed them the mai. And indeed, Amar Afuna, it's not according to everyone. Really, it's a machlokes Beishamai Beisilel that the Tana we learned in Abraisa. Beishamai say that Emachilin Esanim Demai. Once the Chachamim said it's Asur Midrabanan, Nakuda, finished. You can, and nor can you feed the Achsanoi Demai, but Beisilel and Machilin, and we paskin like Beisilel, and therefore again the concept that even if you're not an ani, since you could theoretically, God forbid, become an ani. You can have it because it's not truly prohibited. Now, just to use certain oisius over here, there are many that quote an Esivis who differentiates between all the Isurei Achila Midairaisa versus the Isurei Achila Midarabanan by saying the Esivis says that foods that are also Midairaisa is Isur Chefze. The food itself is inherently prohibited. Foods that are asr, so to say, only midrabanan. The food is not inherently asr, but the chachamim only make an isur gavra. The Nesiva says this to explain the following halacha: that if you have a vendor who, God forbid, sold treifa food, and the customer, the shoygig, he bought the food. But honest, you don't know, you bought the food, and now the question is whether you can ask for your money back. So if the customer has the food, the chazer trei food, whatever it is, then of course he gives back the food and he gets his money back. Question is if the customer consumed the food. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins that if the food, God forbid, was asur midoraisa, the problem was a deraisa isur, then the customer demands his money back. He doesn't have the food, doesn't matter. If the food was asur only midrabanan, if he doesn't have the food to give back, then he can't get his money back. And the question is, why is that? So the Nesivus explains, because Isurei D'Oraisa, we're speaking about Nacholas Asuras, it's an Isur Chefze. So I bought, the Chefze that I bought, Mekachtos, the Chefze was poison. I didn't buy meat, I bought poison. So therefore, even though you ate the poison, but you paid for the wrong product. Isur D'Rabbanan, says the Nesivus, is an Isur Gavre, but the food itself is food. So of course, if you have the food, give it back, get your money back. But if you don't have the food, then you can't get your money.
And if you bought poison, you don't have to give it back? Is that like, you know what I'm saying?
Like over here, the tragedy that happened over here, correct. When they discovered all of the not kosher food that was being sold over here many years ago in Pico. So if you don't, so the question is, can you ask for your food back? That's a din of Shulchan Aruch. And the chashash, thank God, here was an Isur D'Rabbanan chashash. Let's not get into that, the terrible story. Oh, so hold on, but it's good to know, guys. Many people know this Nesivus, really. In Yeshiva, we quote him the whole time. And as Hasidim, we should know that the Alter Rebbe does not accept the Nesivus. In the beginning of Tanya, Bashgacha Pratos, we're almost there in Tanya Perik Ches, when the Alter Rebbe is speaking about Machalas Asurais, the Alter Rebbe says that when the Chachamim said a food cannot be consumed, that food becomes connected to Shalosh Klippus Atmeis. In other words, an Isur that Rabbanan, according to the Alter Rebbe, Paskis, we don't Paskin and Tanya, but Alter Rebbe is establishing a fact based on which the whole premise of the Nesiv is, it just goes away. Now, based on the Alter Rebbe's fact that even an Isur that Rabbanan is an Isur Chefze, this Gemara now is very good. Even Isurim that Rabbanan are Isur Chefze. The answer that the Gemara gives, how can you be Yotzei the Mitzvah with the Mai? It's also with the Rabbanan. So the Mai is the only exception. There are many other Isuri that Rabbanan. But since if a person were to become an Ani, there they would be allowed to eat the Mai, L'chora. Here the Alter Rebbe will agree with this concept, that's a rai, that it's an Isur Gavra. Because if the Mai, once Chazal say, we're chayish to the miyuta, the minkar, that they don't separate all of the Trumas Umaisra. So now you can't have it until you do those parts again. If once they made that takana, they sort of say they change the chayas that is being machaya mahava, the food, going gotcha bit down from klipas nega to shalosh klipas atameas, which is what the isur chefza mean. So what difference does it make if the owner is an ani? L'chayr, it's a lot more mistaber to say that even according to the Alter Rebbe, the Mai is an isur gavra. Now it's gavaldi. So when can you not be yotzei the mitzvah of matzah if the matzah itself is inherently problematic? If the matzah is good, elamad, there's a gezerah for you not to eat it, at least since the isur is only an isur gavra, then yes, you could fulfill your mitzvah of matzah, which is the chiddush of our mitzvah, our Mishnah.
Rabbi, do we have time for a question?
Go ahead.
I've been waiting, thinking about this the last couple of days because of Tanya. Do we understand that chametz on Pesach is rooted in klipas noga or in shalosh klipos atmeos?
Oh, for sure, shalosh klipos atmeos.
So its essence changes depending on the time.
Yes, it does.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, my sedishin shenitla trumasai. So the Levi, guys. By the way, this is machlokes tanoim. Whether my sedishin can be consumed by a Yisrael, whether it has kedusha or not. We paskin that my sedishin can be consumed by anyone. It's mamoin of the Levi. But for the Levi himself to be allowed to consume it or to gift it or to sell it, he has to separate meiser and hameiser. So the Mishnah says if he did so, good, then you can be yotzei the mitzvah of matzah and pshita for the Gemara. This is what we have, I said, in Brachas, Shabbos, Erevin. And we're going to have this not only here, but we're going to have this also in Beitza. That the kiven shenitlu trumasa, in fact, a part of the question, chul and haves, of course, you can make matzah out of it. Answers the Gemara, no, it's not pshita that it's needed. The Mishnah has to tell you this din for the unusual scenario. Shegdimoi bashi balim. Here we go. That the owner advanced to the lady Maiserishan while the grain was still in its ears. In other words, before it was threshed, before it was smooth, before there's an obligation to be mafresh trumas umaisres, the lady comes over to the owner and he asks for his 10%. Now let's chop what happens over here. Let's begin just with the number 100. Now from 100 ears of grain, you have to give any amount to the kohen for Truma Gedoyla biblically, but the Chachamim, gave the famous 3 shiurim, whether it is 1 out of 40, 1 out of 50, or 1 out of 60. Let's go with the Baitinist, you're giving 2%. 1 out of 50 is 2%. So if you were to have 100 and you follow the right order, which we should follow the right order, what's going to happen? You're going to give 2 to the kohen. How much do you have left now? 98. Now you give 10% to the Levi. But how much is the Levi getting? 9.8. He's not getting 10. He's not getting 10 from the 100. First you give Truma Gedoyla. Now, what happens if the owner wrongfully gives to the Levi Meiser Rishon before he gave Truma Gedoyla? How much will he give to the Levi? He'll give to the Levi 10 because the Levi is getting 10% from everything that is. Which means that the Levi got 0.2 more than he should have. Now, when the Levi has to give from his normal 9.8, 10%, so the coin gets 10% from 9.8. Question here is, what does the Levi need to do? Is the Levi obligated first to give 0.2 to the coin as Truma Gedoyla, that which the coin should have gotten, and then separate 10%? Or like in our case, that if the owner gave the Levi Meiser Rishon, not when there was already a chalois chiyuv to separate Trumas u'Maisros, not from when there was a meruach, it wasn't even threshed yet. It's still in the ears. There's no chiyuv at all to give anything. If now the owner anticipated and gave the Levi Meiser Rishon, yes, the Levi is still going to have to give Meiser Min HaMeiser. But you know what the Levi need not do? The Levi does not have to also give the 0.2, the little part of Truma Gedola that the Levi Taka would not have received to begin with, because it would have been given directly from the owner to the client. So that's the question. Is the Levi obligated to also separate Truma Gedola or not? And that's what the Mishnah is saying. That if the Levi only separated Trumas Meiser is good. When is it good? Shekdimi Bashibalim. Again, Shekdimi means that the Levi took it from the owner. The owner gave it to the Levi, 10%, while it was still in the ears, before Truma Gedola was separated. And they're not Leimenu Trumas Meiser. And the Levi indeed did not separate the 0.2. He only gave the 10% from the 10%. And that's taka good enough. The Chatchila is good enough, and that's the Chiddush of the Mishnah. Who can Rabbi Abo, the Amar Rabbi Abo, in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, that my Serisha in Shekdimi Bashibalim, Dafka, because it was given to him before there was any chiyuv to give Truma, then the Levi is exempt from giving from what he received Truma Gedola. The Levi will always have to give Meiser Min HaMeiser, but he won't also have to give Truma Gedola. Shenemer, as it says in Parshas Koirach, that Tahari Meisim Imenu Trumas Hashem, you the Levi you have to separate from what you received Meiser Min HaMeiser, from which we learn Meiser Min HaMeiser Omarti Lo to you the Levi, and not two things, not Truma Gedola and Trumas Meiser Min HaMeiser. So Amalei Rapapala Abaye, if that's the case, and we have a limit from the pasuk in Koirach that all the Levi has to separate is only Trumas Meiser, what's going to happen if the owner did not give the Meiser Rishon before Truma Gedola to the Levi when it was Bashibalim? What happens if he made a kri, if he made a pile? Once you make the pile, now you chayv to separate Trumas from Meisers. What happens if now the owner gave it out of the Seder? Why don't we say that the Levi also need not give anything to the client other than Meiser Min HaMeiser? But we know it's not true. That if the Levi got his Meiser Rishon after there was a chiyuv to separate Trumas on the owner, then the Levi has to give first, like I mentioned in our example, 0.2, and then Meiser Min HaMeiser. So Amalei, Lecho Amar Kro, there's another pasuk. And the pasuk says, Mikoil Matn Leisechem, Torimu es Kol Trumas Hashem. That is adding that the Levi has to add Truma Gedola. So one pasuk says you do give, alludes that you have to give Truma Gedola. Another pasuk says you don't have to give Truma Gedola. So the Gemara is asking, Omar Isa, how do you know which one to apply in which scenario? And that's logical, answers the Gemara. Hi, Idgan, when you made a kri, when it's halachically called grain, therefore there's a chiyuv to separate trumais. The owner skipped a step. Someone has to pay the price for that. Makes sense. That is where the Levi has to pay the price. Why the Levi? Because the Levi is the one that's benefiting from the skipping of the step. He should not benefit. The coin should not lose. But if you are Hidimai Bashi Balim when it's still in the ears, it makes sense. Since it's not called Idgan, it's not called grain, therefore there's no chiyuv. So if there was no chiyuv, and there is one pasuk that's teaching us that the only thing the Levi has to separate is Trumas Meiser, it makes sense to apply it in the scenario where Loi Idgan Gevaldik. Next case in the Mishnah was Meiser Sheni or Hegdish, that if they were redeemed, now the produce is completely chulin, you can make matzah out of it. So again, pshit, of course it's good. So the Gemara answers, that you didn't properly redeem it. When you, the owner, when the redeemer is the original owner, both by Meiser Sheni and by Hegdish, they share the same rule, that it's not enough for you to give the value of the produce you are redeeming. You have to add a halachic fifth. What happens if you did not add the fifth? That is the case of the Mishnah. So what you might have thought, since the original owner who needs to still give the fifth, he didn't fully redeem it yet. It's not redeemed. It's not redeemed. Meiser Sheni cannot be consumed outside Yerushalayim. Hegdish, God forbid, you're moil by Hegdish. We just learned in the daf from above, whether you're doing it b'mezid, you chayv misa b'dei shamayim, whether you're doing it b'shoigig, you have to bring a korban hashama ilois. Can't have matzah from it. So the answer is no. Kamash malon the ein choimish ma'akev. In other words, the redemption is done by you giving the keren, like another obligation on the gavra. The fact that the Torah says that if the redeemer is the original owner, they have to add a choimish, that's the din on the person. But the item itself becomes bona fide redeemed when you give its value either designated to eat in Yerushalayim or to the Beis HaMikdash. The next din of the Mishnah, that Kohanim, they can eat matzah made out of challah. They received challah, and they can make matzah out of it. Or they receive truma, they can make matzah out of it. Again, pshita. So the Gemara says, no, it's a chiddush. That maybe matzah is only shavel l'challah. Maybe you can only fulfill the mitzvah when you eat something that everyone else can eat. Here you're eating something that only Kahanim can eat. So kamash malan that you could fulfill the mitzvah. Now the Gemara needs a source for that. Why indeed can the kohen fulfill the mitzvah? So matzos. The Torah repeats the word matzos many times throughout the parsha, and one of those repetitions is to add that any matzah is good, meaning even though that only you can eat it because you're a kohen and it's truma, seder. So you as a kohen, you indeed can fulfill your obligation. Then the Mishnah says that you can't fulfill your mitzvah if you ate tevel. Again, trying to get out of pshita. Of course, it's not good. Like we had above the mai, right? Mitzvah above aveda. Answers the Gemara loy that the chiddush is tzricha the tevel midrabanan. If the item is to begin with only called tevel, the obligation of separating tithing is only midrabanan, and you did not taka do it, but you would think that it's only a drabanan. Let's go back to what we learned above. And you would think, like the Nesivas, that it's only an Isser Gavra. And maybe if it's an Isser Gavra, right, like by Demai, if we're going to learn that way, then you're good. So the Kamash will know, the answer is no, that an Isser Drabanan is like Alter Rebbe says, it's an Isser Chefzer. I don't care that it's a Drabanan. Now, what's the Metzias of you having something that is only obligated to have tithing removed from it, Midrabanan? Example, maybe we could have given it Chutzlaritz in those countries near Eretz Yisrael, but here we're speaking about if you grew something in a non-perforated flower pot. B'chlal Chazal tell us that when you have a hole in a pot, a hole through which a shoydish can go through, it's yoinik, it derives some of its nourishment from the ground, and that's machayiv you to separate trumas from ma'aseres. But if something grows in a non-perforated pot, on a biblical level, it need not be tithed at all, even if the earth was earth from Israel. Remember, as kids, they would sell from Eretz Yisrael those little things that had earth from the Holy Land, colorful earth. But the machayiv is not that the earth came from Eretz Yisrael. The machayiv is it has to grow from the land itself. And takamidoidai, so you are exempt. But since the Chachamim were machayiv you, so the Mishnah is telling you, you may not fulfill your mitzvah of eating matzah. It means you don't even fulfill it on a biblical level. Again, pshita, if you didn't remove meiser and hameiser, it's banafai tevel. So the Gemara says, no, this is the case. What happened was the Levi did separate meiser and hameiser. But what the Levi did not do is, the Levi didn't also separate Truma Gedola, and the case here, unlike the case above, is that the owner gave to the Levi the Meiser Rishon when it was already Bekeri, it was already Bekri. The owner, for whatever reason, did not first separate Truma Gedola as he should have. The Levi has to separate Truma Gedola as well, and that one step he missed, and that's the whole part of the Mishnah. That we should learn from that part of the pasuk in Parshas Koyach. That meiser and hameiser amarti l'cha, v'lo trum gedola utrumas meiser and hameiser. So kamash malan that we have the other pasuk mikol matnei seichem. You have to give as kol trumas Hashem. That in this case you have to also give truma gedola, and if you did not, then the Levi subsequently no other yid can fulfill their obligation. Let's go with mitzvah babaveh. Then the Mishnah says v'lo b'meiser sheni v'hegdash shaloi nivdu. Again, if shaloi nivdu and you're having meiser sheni outside Yerushalayim, that's the case here. So then pshita that it's not okay. So no, lo'elam the nivdu, you redeemed it. Elama, u'mayloi nivdu shaloi nivdu kel Hassan. You didn't redeem it properly. So unlike above, where you didn't have the chaimish, now we're learning other dinim when it comes to being paid the meiser sheni, being paid the hegdash, and the Torah specifies, let's go by meiser sheni. Right, what's called a not halachically valid redemption, shepadoi al gaba asimon. And asimon, similar to the modern word asimon, is when you had what will become a coin before it has in it the picture of the king. In other words, it's a valuable metal, but there is no tsura from the government in the coin. And the Torah when it says, we read this every yontif, that v'tzarto hakesef. So the pshat is buying the money, right? If you're going up to Yerushalayim and you're not going to schlep the produce, so then you redeem it and you take the money in your hand. But the Torah doesn't say to take it. The Torah says v'tzarto, literally means to bind. Chazal darshan, no, tzarto also means atzura. that what coinage is good to be used for the redemption of Ma'aser Sheni, only davar sheyesh lo tzura. And if it doesn't have a tzura, even though if it has value, the redemption is not good. It's likewise hegdish. You're machalal hegdish on real estate. What's greater? What's better than real estate? No, the Torah is machadesh that hegdish can never be redeemed on real estate. The hegdish chila agabe karka, which is ineffective. And Achmana Amar at the end of Bechukosai that the nosan hakesev dafke kesev and then v'kamloi, from where Chazal learned that if you gave real estate to redeem it hegdish, it's ineffective, and that is exactly what the Mishnah is alluding to. All right. Says the Gemara, the last narrow line. That Yachol, you would think that Yoitze Adami the Chavasoi B'Tevel Shaloi Niskan, that you can fulfill your obligation of matzah if you used grain, right, that has not been fixed. Tevel that has not been fixed. Alo, the moment you said the word tevel, tevel means you were not masakin it yet. Frek the Gemara. Gemara is interrupting. What do you mean? Tevel shaloi niskan. Call tevel shaloi niskan. There's something unique about this. Eloah. What the Brisa means to say is that if you have tevel and you took off almost everything, there's only one thing that you didn't take off. It's still called tevel. In other words, since there is still one more chiyuv of separations, you may not fulfill your obligation of eating matzah. Now we're giving examples that you took off Truma Gedolah, but you didn't take off Trumas Ma'aser. In other words, you took off Truma Gedolah, you took off Ma'aser Rishon. The Levi has the Ma'aser Rishon. You did the Truma Gedolah, not good, because the Ma'aser Rishon is called Tevel. Or you took off Truma Gedolah, you took off Ma'aser Rishon, you gave it to the Levi, but during the first, second, and fourth and fifth year, you didn't separate Ma'aser Sheni. You can argue this is so not that important. B'chlal Ma'aser Sheni you get to keep yourself. Or on the third and the sixth year, you took off Truma Gedolah and Ma'aser Rishon, and the only thing you didn't do is to take off Ma'aser Ani. In other words, the Brisa wants to tell you that even if only one step of the tithing was not done, that grain may not be used for the fulfillment of the mitzvah of Imatzah. And Minayin, how do you know the Brisa says that you're not Yoitzer? So Talmud Leimer, Nachamol, the pasuk that we began on Amud Aleph, that it says Lo Yishoichal Olav Chametz. Then it says Shivas Shalom Techel Olav Matzos, right? Lachamoini. So Mi She'isurai, what? Mi She'isurai Mishum Bal Techel Olav Chametz. That is like we learned on Amud Aleph. That which if you would have eaten it chametz dik, you would have been chai for eating chametz. That is what you need to use for matzah. But the Yotza said this produce, forget about the chametz dik isur. She'en isurai mishum bal toichel chametz. Question is why not as well? But we'll get to that in a moment. But if it's still tevel, you can't eat it anyways. So if the problem is tevel, let's go back to the hekesh that we began today's shiur with. So that is not something from which you can be yoitz the mitzvah of matzah. Okay, the problem is with the wording of the Baraisa. Now, I understand that if you have grain and it's tevel, the person were to make chametz dika bread out of it, there would be two issues, l'chayra. It would be chametz and it would be tevel. But the Baraisa doesn't seem to say that. The Baraisa is saying that before you separated all the trumas from ma'aseres, if you would have made bread out of it, the only problem would have been bal toichel tevel. But that's not true. Frek the Gemara, the second to last line, the Yisuri, the chametz lahech and oslo. It's still chametz if you let it rise. It's also tevel. So the Gemara says, no, it's not. No, it's not. That before you separated all the trumas from ma'aseres, when this is still called tevel, listen to this, and you may mix it with water, and you let it rise, it's not chametz. It's not halachically prohibited as chametz. Why? Amar Rav Sheshes, that this Baraisa follows the Tana Rebbe Shimon, right? The famous Shita that says that ein isur chalal isur. In other words, how can the isur of chametz be chal on your product if prior to it, it's already also because it is tevel? And whenever there is a pre-existing condition, it's pre-existing isur, so there's no room for a new isur to be chal. Now, there's so many exceptions to the ein isur chalal isur, but let's focus on what the Gemara says. And the Tanya, where do we have Shitas Rav Shimon? That Rav Shimon Omer Daf Lamed Vav, that ho'oichal nevela b'yom HaKippurim, that's a great example. So the din is, you're going to be potter. Wow. Now, hold on. What are we speaking about? For eating nevela, right, it's a lav. The person eats the nevela b'shoigeg, they're not chayv chatos. It's not a sin for which you're going to be chayv chatos b'mezid. Eating on Yom Kippur, however, if you, God forbid, b'mezid, you're chayv chatos. So for eating on Yom Kippur, b'shoigeg, a person is chayv chatos. Nevertheless, says Rab Shimon, that if a person eats nevela on Yom Kippur, b'shoigeg, he's exempt from a chatos. Why is he exempt from a chatos? He ate on Yom Kippur. And the answer is because prior to Yom Kippur, this meat was already asur as nevela. Hold on, asks Rashi, what's going to happen if this animal was not a nevela from before Yom Kippur? What's going to happen in that case? Even here, says Rashi, Rab Shimon will hold that you are exempt from a chatos. Look inside the top Rashi. Because the ein isur yom kippurim chalal isur nevela. Now the im by yom this nabla. What happens if it became a nevela on Yom Kippur? When Yom Kippur came in, it was not a nevela; it was alive. Still, says Rashi, it's not going to be usher because of eating on Yom Kippur. Why is that? Because when Yom Kippur came in, it was alive. Ever menachai. Because whenever there is a pre-existing prohibition, there is no room. You can't eat it. If it's dead, it was an avail. If it was living, you can't eat it. So you were not allowed to eat it to begin with. Now that Yom Kippur comes, based on the klal of ein isur chalal isur, there's no room, so to say, for the isur of achilas Yom Kippur to be chal on this nevela. Now, a person is not allowed to eat it, but if they ate it, they're not going to be chayv chatos. So based on ein isur chalal isur, something is tevel before Pesach. Now Pesach comes in and you make it into a bread and it's chametzik. You will not be chayiv for eating kodesh, for eating chametz. There's no isur kodesh and there's not going to be an isur chatos. Yes, you ate tevel. Tevel is misa midei shamayim, but you're not chayiv chatos. That's one approach as to who the author of the Bryce is.
Come, Lebe, the Rabbi doesn't apply here.
No. The isur to begin with is not chal. Now, there's so many exceptions, Tanach, this Isur Moisev and this Isur Koilel. We're not getting into that over here. Just a concept. So the Bryce is Rab Shimon. Or Ravina says, hold on. The heckish works. Okay, you're chayiv on chametz, but it's not the only problem. Afilu teima rabbanan, who will hold that in this type of Isur, we do not always, we do say that the Isur can be chal. In a chanami. That means if a person makes bread, chametz bread out of tevel, he'll be chayv two things. And the Braisa means to say that what is valid for the mitzvah of matzah, only something that if it would become chametz you would only be even on chametz. Misha yisurei only mishum al teichel chametz bilvad. Yotze zeh she'ein yisurei mishum al teichel chametz bilvad, but dam noch yisur ela af mishum al teichel tevel. And that can be the author of the Braisa. The Gemara rejects it, not because of the Sfada, but because of the Lashon of the Braisa. Asks the Gemara, Mida Bilvad Ksiv. The Braisa should have used the word Bilvad. The Braisa doesn't use the word Bilvad. Read the words. The Braisa is authentic. It's authoritative. The Braisa is telling you that you're not going to be over on Chametz, period. And indeed, like Rab Sheshes has explained, that the author of the Braisa is the Tanach Rab Shimon. He doesn't subscribe to the exceptions of any isur chalal isur. And yes, since you're b'chlal not over bal teichel chametz, that's the link we have today, the one big gavaldik link, and only in that direction. If it doesn't become chametzik, then you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. It's mamish amazing. It's amazing. Zelu umazeh. Only that which can become more problematic is something that can be a lot greater. B'chlal, this whole concept we find by Tumantara. Alpi Torah, Alpi Dinei Doiraisa, only a yid can become tamei because there's a greater amount of kedusha, right? When a woman gives birth, whenever there's a greater potential for holiness, it goes together. Zelu umazeh, something that can become chametzik, the good side can be used for the mitzvah of matzah. If something b'chlal cannot become chametzik, right? Like oiris and doichen, and by the way, we take a paskin that oiris and doichen cannot become chametzik. The only reason why we don't eat it, that's the whole issue of kidneys. And we'll speak more about that, God willing, in the shiurim to come with the help of Hashem.
Rabbi, quick question. On this concept of Trumas Meiser, is that chiyuv on the Levi to give that, or is it on the Yisrael? Meaning, I took off my Truma, my Meiser. I gave my 9.8 to the Levi. Why is that my problem, whether this guy gives it or not?
I didn't say it's your problem. If the produce did not have Meiser, the Truma Gedolah separated from it, If it doesn't have it, so it's still in it. So how can the Levi eat it?
So I'm saying it's the Levi's issue, but my 90% or whatever it is that I have, I'm fine with.
You're
right?
One second. You violated going out of the Seder. Or you have an obligation to tithe things according to its proper order.
No, I did my 2%. I took my 10%, gave it to the Levi. You're saying that I also have to take the 2% out of the 10% before I give it to the Levi?
One more time. If you took off the Truma Gedela, then the whole case is that you did not do that.
No, I understand. But if I take my 2% and then I take the 10% and give it to the Levi, now the Levi has to take 2% of his 10% and give it to the Kohen.
No, he doesn't. If you took off Truma Gedela before you gave it to the Levi for sure only has to take off Trumas Meiser.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. So I'm saying if the Levi didn't take off his Trumas Meiser, but my part that I took care of, I'm okay with. No?
Sure, 100%. Nothing to do with you.
So this whole chiddush of the Mishnah that you can't use tevel, it's talking about basically the Levi stuff.
The Levi, the whole Amud base was the Levi, sure.
Nothing to do with it with the regular Yisrael.
No, that was the Mishnah. Yeah, correct.
Got it. And then one more question in terms of Meiser Sheni. It says the problem with Meiser Sheni is if it wasn't redeemed exactly, you'd add the Chaimish, whatever. But regular Meiser Sheni, can I make matzah out of my Meiser Sheni, eat it in Yerushalayim?
Yeah. So the Mishnah is speaking about Meiser Sheni
that you were redeeming.
Outside.
So regular Meiser Sheni outside of Yerushalayim, you definitely cannot.
Unless you were plated, but if you skipped a step.
Right. Got it.